Tally-ho, Silver! Away! I should have the microphone facing me, shouldn't I? Let's try that again, shall we? All right. Tally-ho, Silver! Away! Okay, why am I talking about swords? Why? This isn't even a real sword. This is a sword that is designed for practicing using real swords because you're such a bad swordsman, you can't even use a bokken. This is a bamboo sword. And of course, my microphone is going really slow as comparison to the screen. And it's like, we are going to delay because we are dickheads. Da, 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 da. Okay. So the randomness aside, I actually do have... Ow! Ow! No, okay, sorry. I actually do have research that I have been working on. Now I know that I seem like I don't do a lot in my spare time. I do. I admittedly haven't been focused on it as I should have. And I finally have a job now. Great thing about the job I have, when you have a job that has really positive people around you, but the job itself is horrible, you know what? It helps. It teaches you how to deal with really crappy jobs. It teaches you how to have discipline. Something I guess I don't have. And discipline is a difficult subject. But I don't want to get into all my life particulars because this is not a life update. This actually is my measly ass attempt before I run to the grocery store to talk about my research. My research. Okay? Now, I want to read a few things to you. Okay? This might turn into a two-part video. I don't know. I don't actually know how to do this very well. I was doing it with my mom, explaining to her my research before, but okay, so. First thing I'm going to talk about is textbooks, because I think this helps to explain the failures and downfalls of our system of knowledge. Our education system, our systems of learning. In the world, there are means about which we can teach others. Now, I want to read some books to you. Now, these are we're going to start out with the history books, then read the chemistry books, then some other stuff. And I'm only going to read like a short paragraph or two. Now, I want you to think to yourselves as students. Now, think very open-mindedly. Imagine as a student, I'm this ignorant new freshman. Maybe a lot of you have never even studied these things before. Looking at our system of education, you may never have actually read a book that talks about Western civilization or chemistry or any of these things, because we don't as people have to take these courses, which is absolutely mind-boggling to me. I don't understand how any reasonable human being could study and not have to study things like history or chemistry. How can you survive in the world and not be a total airhead dumbfuck, have no perspective, have no context on the world, without really learning about things? Again, this is why I'm an anal retentive fuck about some of these things. But I'm trying now to give all of you the opportunity to learn about Christopher-Brown. Christopher-Brown and his very peculiar perspective on the world. I hope you all find this interesting. So, the first book, which I guess some background on it would be important. I have owned this book since... great, and the parent is coming down. Mom, I'm recording for all of my friends my research. So, can you give me a few minutes and not, like, interrupt the video because I'm not going to record again? Thank you. Okay, so, background on this story. Many years ago, I purchased this book. Well, actually, I didn't. She did. Parent in the other room. My mom, I was being homeschooled at the time. And I won't get into the background of it. You can all pester me if you want to know the story. But many years ago, I was homeschooled. From the time I was in halfway through 6th grade, when I started studying Western civilization, it was like, amazing. I love history. But that's not part of the story. History has context. When I was a child, My mother went out and she purchased these books. Now, she purchased 2 sets of books. The first was this one. This book right here. This book was written. Oh, it was like, I think this was like the 3rd or 4th edition in the series, and it was written by an individual. Now, I have the 2 parts, and this one, as you can tell, was brand new and has been thrown about and been beat up and the rest of it for many, many, many years. Totally disrespected. And I know my friends like Sarah will look at this book and, if you actually saw it, and scream, "Ah!" Okay? No disrespect to my books. If a book has reached this point in my household, it means it's an amazing book. It means that it's been read and tossed about and read again 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 and read again. The books that have never left the bookshelf, those are the ones that don't get worn out. And I know that I'm bad at treating my stuff well, which is really sad because then it doesn't last. But I guess I'm just one of those people who, you know, I read stuff and I use it and I paint it and I underline it and I highlight it and I do all kinds of crap to it. And in some of my books I've written nasty notes about how I think the author sucks in writing, but okay. Back to what I was saying. My research is about how systems of thought, systems of the education system has changed, and particularly in things like textbooks, and looking at the broad historical perspective of it and how we and our focus on knowledge and information have changed over time. How we've lost things like context. How we've lost things like rhetoric. You know, it's like original. You know how you hear the 3 R's as reading, writing, and arithmetic? Well, originally it was reading, writing, and rhetoric. But nobody even knows what rhetoric is. It's like this subject that you maybe have heard about from some prof in some strange course that you took in English because he may have gotten a degree in rhetoric or something, but you've never really understood what it is because no one ever talks about it. Just like you may not have really studied Western civilization because you were a nursing student and you didn't have to take it. And you only took the courses you were absolutely required to take or were somehow in your mind directly related to whatever you were taking. Me, on the other hand, I, on the other hand, was a very different student. I was a very, 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 very different student because I was going into game design. So I got to take all kinds of courses. Well, that's not true. I was going into game design, but I was an electrical engineering computer science major who had interests in music and interests all over the place. So I took a lot of courses, which is good because it allowed me a perspective that none of you idiots have because you were too scared and too focused on money and going into debt to take anything. Okay? So you didn't take those courses. So you didn't gain the perspective that I have. By the way, Scott, yes, Scott Wiggins, you awesome dude, yes, we totally know that these books are related to Jack McCluskey. Yes, because my mother bought these from PCC when Jack McCluskey was teaching. And he had both of these books as required reading. Which I think is just awesome because, you know, that just proves that Jack is like anal as fuck. So anyway, as I said, I was reading this book, because I didn't really read the other one because it was, I don't know, I just never got to it. But this one I read through, because my mother was reading me this and Will and Ariel Durant. I was playing video games at the time and, you know, doing other stuff. You know, I think Stargate was coming onto television, had been on TV for a little while, and I was getting interested in culture and civilization and ancient worlds, because kids like this stuff. You know, I mean, fantasy. Why do you like fantasy stories? Why do you like mythology? Why do you like this stuff? Because it's interesting. What do these ancient stories have? They have magic, they have action, they have adventure, they have all these sorts of things. What is science? Science takes magic to a modern perspective. Because what is science? Science is talking about things which in past we have described as magic. What is technology that is beyond our ability to understand, fathom, or comprehend that just does amazingly cool stuff? It's magic. That's what's so cool. Now, of course, if you're truly a hardcore geek, you'll say that magic is different, but we're talking about in how humans have really used it. Okay? This is what's so interesting. Now, this book I will begin to read. Now, I want to read just the first paragraph. Okay? The first paragraph. And then I'm going to read a paragraph or so out of couple of pages out of this book. Now I want you to listen very carefully to the two passages. And I want you to tell me in the comment section what you notice that's different about the books that I'm going to present to you now. We're going to start with history, and then we're going to move into chemistry and others. Now, I'm going to try to read these as interestingly as I can. Now, I, of course, am biased, so please excuse how I read these, okay? Because, again, I'm a biased asshole who have been studying these things, have been frustrated with these things, and certain books have certain fondnesses for me. So, again, just listen. Preface. We are often reminded of how important it is to understand today's world if we are to deal with our growing number of challenges. And yet that understanding will be incomplete if we in the Western world do not comprehend the meaning of Western civilization and the role Western civilization has played in the world. For all of our modern progress, we still greatly reflect our religious traditions, our political systems and theories, our economic and social structures of our cultural heritage. I have written this history of Western civilization to assist a new generation of students in learning more about the past that has helped create them and the world in which they live. Okay. Now let's read the beginning of preface of book 2. Okay? Now, I will try. We'll see. What do you notice different? George Orwell once remarked that keeping the past up to date is a full-time job. This insight seems particularly telling as a result of the startling rush of events during the last few years. Trends that seemed so clear only yesterday have turned out to be no trend at all. In addition, dramatic advances in historical scholarship have cast new light on old problems and have placed into prominence subject matters that historians previously had all but ignored. Accordingly, we have worked hard to keep the past up to date for this 13th edition of Western Civilization. Yet we have always worked within the framework of authorial principles bequeathed to us by E.M. Burns, principles that may have served to make this book a textbook classic. We offer a history of civilizations, an evolving account of the ways in which human beings have organized their lives in response to changing environments and persistent needs. Thus, we complement narrative passages with discussions of ideas and societal institutions, and we draw heavily on pictorial materials to give our readers the best impression possible of how our civilizations really looked. We try as well to avoid a tone of disembodied truth, both because we do not believe there is such a thing and because we want to engage and maintain our readers' attention. Our urgent desire is to demonstrate without resorting to cheapness that first-year history need not be viewed as a chore but might be welcomed as a source of intellectual excitement, even delight. All right. Now, think to yourselves a question. Have I told you anything really about history or Western civilization? Has you the book? Now, I read a whole page. I better go back to this one. As a teacher of Western civilization courses, At a major university, I've become aware of the tendency of many textbooks to simplify the content of Western civilization courses by emphasizing an intellectual perspective or political perspective, or, more recently, a social perspective, often at the expense of sufficient details and a chronological framework. This approach is confusing to students whose high school social studies programs have often neglected a systematic study of Western civilization. Now, it's true, they both do start to get boring, but it's interesting. Even if this preface starts out with, something, but maybe I should turn the pages. Well, I won't go into it. I like this book better. That's my bias. Why do I like it? Why do I like that introduction? That first paragraph. Because it tells me something. It tells me something about history. So reading through the book, it continues to tell me about history. I'm not saying every book is perfect. I'm not saying any book can be perfect. But I am saying that it has something. It provides context. Now, these two books, they offer a very, very interesting contrast. Both are talking about how history is important in your lives. How chemistry is important in your lives. This one is the 4th edition, Chemistry, The Molecular Nature of Matter and Change by Silberg. Now, again, I'm going to read the beginning of chapter 1. Okay? Now, this book is interesting. The opening has sort of this picture here, which you probably can't see well. That is sort of little digital pictures of molecules floating about, bashing into each other. So, let me read. Chapter 1, Keys to the Study of Chemistry. The science of chemistry stands at the forefront of change in the 21st century, creating greener energy sources to power society and sustain the environment, using breakthrough knowledge of the human genetic makeup to understand diseases and design medicines, and even researching the origin of life as we investigate our and nearby solar systems for signs of it. Addressing these and countless other changes and opportunities depends on an understanding of the concepts you will learn in this course. At this point, your interest in chemistry may be little more than satisfying a requirement for your major. You know that chemistry is a basic science with connections to many careers, but once this course is out of the way, who cares? You may wonder whether chemistry is important at all to you personally. Soon you'll be wondering how any educated person can function today without knowing some chemistry. In fact, the impact of chemistry on your daily life is mind-boggling. Consider the beginning of a typical day, perhaps this one. From a chemical point of view, molecules align in the liquid crystal display of your clock. Electrons flow through its circuitry to create a noise, and you throw off the thermal insulator of manufactured polymer. You jump into the shower to emulsify fatty substances of your skin and hair with treated water and formulated detergents. You adorn yourself in an array of processed chemicals, pleasant-smelling pigmented materials suspended in cosmetic gel, dyed polymeric fibers, synthetic footwear, and metal alloy jewelry. Today, breakfast is a bowl of nutrient-enriched, spoilage-retarded cereal and milk, a piece of fertilizer-grown, pesticide-treated fruit, and a cup of hot, aqueous solution of nutrient-stimulating alkaloid. Yes, after brushing your teeth with artificially flavored dental hardening agents dispersed in a colloidal abrasive, you're ready to leave. So you grab your laptop, which I'm recording on, an electronic device based on ultra-thin micro-etched semiconductor layers powered by a series of voltaic cells. Collect some books, processed cellulose and plastic, electronically printed with light and oxygen-resistant inks. Hop on your hydrocarbon-fueled metal vinyl ceramic vehicle, electrically ignited, a synchronized series of controlled gaseous explosions, and you're off to class. Now, the influence of chemistry extends to the natural environment as well. The air, water, and land, and the organisms that thrive there form a remarkably complex system of chemical interactions. While modern chemical products have enhanced the quality of our lives, their manufacture and use also pose increasing dangers, such as toxic waste, acid rain, global warming, and ozone depletion. If our careless application of chemical principles has led to my brain not finding a sentence, has led to some of these problems, a careful application of the same principles is helping to solve them. Perhaps the significance of chemistry is most profound when you contemplate the chemical nature of biology. Molecular events taking place within you right now allow your eyes to scan this page and your brain cells to translate fluxes of electric charge into thought. The most vital biological question: how did life arise and evolve? How does an organism reproduce, grow, and age? What is the essence of health and disease? Ultimately have chemical answers. This, of course, comes with a bonus: the development of two mental skills you can apply to any science-related field. The first skill, common to all science courses, is the ability to solve problems systematically. The second is specific to chemistry, for as you comprehend its ideas, your mind's eye will learn to see a hidden level of the universe, one filled with incredibly minute particles, hurtling at fantastic speeds, colliding billions of times a second, and interacting in ways that determine everything inside and outside of you. The first chapter holds the key to help you enter this new world. Now, I admit that for some that might be interesting. For me, it felt like a bombardment of very complex, very technical terms that, as a perhaps not well-educated individual, I might have no frigging clue what this bastard's talking about. Also, it doesn't have any context, damn it. And there's a few points in there about, frankly, if I was an English professor who was saying, let's write a good paper, if I was a writer and I was an editor and I was reading this, I'd say, shite, you bastard, what's your fucking problem? Excuse my language, but I just, the writing is atrocious. It is. And it has no purpose. It has no focus. It's just talking about sort of these random things. There is no context. Now, that's why I agree with Postman that most textbooks are poorly written. Now, that one was for my PCC course. Now, this book, I will say, is different. There have been some points I will note. This book I like the writing better in, but I have heard that for the, I don't know if it's the solutions manual or for the book itself, there are mistakes. Now, that's kind of a problem we have. We can have technically perfect in every way and written so poorly that it makes you want to gouge your eyeballs out. Then you can have, it has a few technical flaws that your prof can point out, but written in a way that makes sense to you and you like. Now, I like this because I'm a history person and it shows context and other things. Now, we'll continue with the points of that. I just say that if a textbook, if you've read through that and you don't know the first time through reading it, you can draw things out of it, it's poorly written. I should be able to read through a textbook once, a chapter once, and know the material. Now, not perfectly, not in vast, subtle details, but I should be able to read through a book like this, through a chapter, and by the end of that chapter, I should know, at least to some extent, I should remember the material. Now, if my brain doesn't remember the material, that means that the writing is poor. Now, part of that is not, there's ways of how you create the material, how you present the material, but it says something is amiss here. There is something foul in the state of Denmark. Yes, something smells foul. Now, this one you won't be able to see, which really I think sucks. But in the picture down here, down here, there is this amazing series of 4 ancient swords. Kind of a little bit rusted out, but they're really, really awesome to look at. And the associated picture, because remember, whenever you open a book and you see swords, I'm sorry to say this, people, but as a boy, as a male, as a man, and I think girls probably too, when you see swords in the lower hand corner and you've read anything on, you've watched TV, you've watched fantasy and action and heroes, and little kids were like, swords and shields and laser guns, and it's cool. Okay, we're guys. It's just how we were raised. But I think girls are the same way. I think that culturally we like stuff that goes boom, and we can fight in swords and action and adventure and heroism and all that. And I think girls, sadly, have been stereotyped to think that you don't like that. You're supposed to be into romance and all that. But guys like that too, We're just kind of trained that way. Guys are trained only to like action and adventure, and girls are only trained to like romance and all of those other things. But in reality, we're both, Because I know girls who are like my mom, who's, shing, I like romance, but action and adventure and explosions and things that go boom. See? All people, I think, are both. We wouldn't be human otherwise. Now, let me read first the picture, then 2 pages. Okay. Copper is easily extracted from its ores, and was one of the first metals worked. The Bronze Age began following the discovery that adding some tin to copper made the metal harder and stronger. These 4 bronze swords date from 1250 to 850 BCE, the Late Bronze Age, and are from a collection in the Naturhistorische. Okay, people who speak German, I'm bad. I'm sorry. Naturhistorisches Museum in Vienna, Austria. From the bottom to top, they are a short sword, an antenna-type sword, a tongue-shaped sword, and a leptua sword. Again, I don't speak Latin, so I don't know. And I believe that's actually the sword that the Roman legionaries used to use. So, pretty cool. All right, now, that's just my little side tangent. Now, back to actually the writing. Fundamentals. Welcome to chemistry! Oh, by the way, whenever I read an exclamation point, I'm really going to, woo. Okay. One more time. Welcome to chemistry! You're about to embark on an extraordinary voyage that will take you to the center of science. Looking in one direction, toward physics, you will see how the principles of chemistry are based on the behavior of atoms and molecules. Looking in another direction, towards biology, you will see how chemists contribute to an understanding of that most awesome property of matter, life. You will be able to look at an everyday object, see in your mind's eye its composition in terms of atoms, and understand how that composition determines its properties. Introduction and orientation. Chemistry is the science of matter and the changes it can undergo. The world of chemistry, therefore, embraces everything material around us. The stones we stand on, the food we eat, the flesh we are made of, and the silicon we build into computers. There is nothing material beyond the reach of chemistry, be it living or dead, vegetable or mineral, on Earth or in a distant star. Chemistry and society. We have only to look around us to appreciate the impact of chemistry on technology and society. In the earliest days of civilization, when the Stone Age gave way to the Bronze Age and then to the Iron Age, people did not realize that they were doing chemistry when they changed the material they found as stones, we would now call them minerals, into metal. See Figure 1. Remember the swords. The possession of metals gave them a new power over their environment, and treacherous nature became less brutal. The trappings of civilization emerged as skills in transforming materials grew. Glass, jewels, coins, ceramics, and inevitably weapons became more varied and effective. Art, agriculture, and warfare became more sophisticated. None of this would have happened without chemistry. The development of steel accelerated the profound impact on, The development of steel accelerated the profound impact of chemistry on society. Better steel led to the Industrial Revolution, where muscles gave way to steam and giant enterprises could be contemplated. With improved transport and greater output from factories came more extensive trade, and the world became simultaneously a smaller but busier place. None of this would have happened without chemistry. With the 20th century, and now the 21st, came enormous progress in the development of the chemical industry. Chemistry transformed agriculture. Synthetic fertilizers provided the means of feeding the enormous, growing population of the world. Chemistry transformed communication and transportation. Then, and still continuing vigorously in the current century, chemistry provided advanced materials such as polymers for fabrics, ultra-pure silicon for computers, and glass for optical fibers. It developed more efficient and renewable fuels. It gave us the tough, light alloys that are needed for modern aircraft and space travel. Chemistry transformed medicine, substantially extended life expectancy, and provided the foundations of genetic engineering. The deep understanding of life that we are developing through molecular biology is currently one of the most vibrant areas of science. None of this progress would have been achieved without chemistry. However, the price of all these benefits has been high. The rapid growth of industry and agriculture, for instance, has stressed the earth and damaged our inheritance. There is now widespread concern about the preservation of our extraordinary planet. It will be up to you and your contemporaries to draw on chemistry in whatever career you choose, to build on what has already been achieved. Perhaps you will help to start a new phase of civilization based on new materials, just as semiconductors transformed society in the 20th century. Perhaps you will help to reduce the harshness of the impact of progress on our environment. To do that, you will need chemistry. Now, it's about the same amount of space, yet totally written with similar content, similar points, but totally different. The organization, totally different, vastly different. What are the differences that you can think of? In my mind, for one, I remember the material from one as opposed to the other. I remember there's not a lot of technical terminology to start with. Why is that? Why should we not put lots of technical terminology at the beginning of a book? Oh, obvious. Your reader may not be familiar with it. Who is your audience? I often feel that these textbooks are not written for students. They're actually written for very pedantic, very arrogant professors who don't really understand anything outside of their career because they themselves only took coursework that was necessary for their advancement in their particular career of choice. This is why I'm so fond of the liberal arts and sciences, because when you have a broad education, you can provide something that people forget. Context. You can provide analogy. You can provide meaning that is not just a fiddle fragment in the world. Chemistry has impact outside of its actual topic. Okay? So chemistry allows for X to occur. What could X be? X could be anything. X could be, as we said, it could be swords, it could be shields, it could be better metals to make swords and shields, it could be providing the means to make better farming equipment, or the means to make better fertilizer, which could provide for more people. But again, that has consequences. The fertilizer can pollute the environment. The fertilizer can provide more food, which can cause more rapid diseases because of the types of fertilizers used. It can, there's all, it can increase the human population, which has consequences. That's why Oppenheimer and the rest of the physicists and scientists who were working on the atomic program for the United States back, in the 40s, why they, after the bomb was dropped, changed their attitude. They did because they understood the consequences. Why? Because they were well educated. What does well educated mean? It means your perspective is broad. You do have specific areas that you're very well versed in, but you have this global perspective of which to draw from. That takes time. It's a lifetime of work. And we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about fitting into the Industrial Revolution box. Okay? But it's not even the Industrial Revolution, because even during the Industrial Revolution, for many years after it began, even into the 20th century, people were well educated and tended to be well-rounded. What changed? What in our culture has changed that has made it now such that people are not well-rounded? Was it our corporate system? Was it our governmental system? Was it bureaucracy? What changed? What changed in the learning process that made it such that people, that we threw out the liberal arts, that we threw out good learning, and we threw out a lot of things? Now, of course, I think Postman, I'm a fan of, he addresses some of these things, but he doesn't address all of them. He doesn't talk about the liberal arts. No, he talks about context and meaning, which is part of the liberal arts and sciences. Something inherent to them. Because they relate to one another in a form and fashion that provides meaning. What is meaning? What is context? Basically, it's the sense of knowing what the hell's going on. It's how it relates, how all things relate to one another. That's context. What is meaning? Meaning is like understanding. It's what does something mean? What do you mean? When you say to another person, what do you mean? What are you saying? I don't understand. It's a definition. It's a sense of understanding. It's a sense of knowing. It's a specific sense. It's a hard thing to explain, you know. I don't have a definition yet for what meaning is, because of course I haven't gotten enough into things like philosophy where you talk about the idea of meaning. I admit this video is 40 minutes long and you may not really get it, but maybe you start to see. Now, when I was in school, I struggled with understanding what is science, what is mathematics. Now, there's even a book I have called by Richard Courant, called What is Mathematics? Now you'd say to yourself, why does that matter? Oh, it matters much. Because that understanding what your subject is provides context. As I studied through these different materials, as I did my own research, I came to realize that all disciplines are narratives. They're social dialogues. They're artificially created to an extent. They're organically created discussions, but they're artificial in the sense that they were created by people. Okay? Does that make sense? So you had kind of a purpose in your conversation. You had a purpose in your conversation. You have to have purpose in your conversation. If you don't, you have no meaning. When you choose to take an action, you're making a purpose. That's where the artificial comes in. But when you say that it's organic, it's a naturally occurring discussion. Okay? Now, when I go back to ancient books like Theaetetus, you know, and even when I start to deal with people who are really big in the social sciences, or not the social sciences, in the liberal arts, you know, you get a different perspective. Liberal arts and sciences. They are really big on context. The problem is, they tend to be conservative these days. Although some are liberal. I admit some are liberal. But, you know, you get into this idea of, you get this extreme polarization. So you won't talk about people like Neil Postman. You won't talk about practicing the new science and the new theories and whatnot. You're stuck kind of in the olden days. And it's like there's kind of this divide where here's what happened after 19 whatever, and this is what happened before 19 whatever. We lost that. There was something going on. I read my books written by my grandfather in the 40s, and then books in the 50s, and even books in the 60s, and it was like something happened in the 60s. The early to mid 60s, something began to happen and change. And I agree. You know, there's the new math and the new this and the new that, and I think I understand the point of it, where they were going, but what was really happening though is a change in understanding. But what ended up happening is, instead of fixing it, instead of looking really at the problem at its core, they broke the system as opposed to improving it. It's kind of like Dee Dee, if you watch Dexter's Laboratory. You know, it's like, instead of going in and asking Dexter what she can touch and then dancing about and having fun in his lab, she pushes the button. And she breaks everything else in the process, and then destroys the lab. You ask, well, why would Dexter have the button? For comedic effect, because that's the point of the story, is to be able to have that, and you need that object in there in order for it to blow up, because it's sort of a trope. Yeah, that's true. But the point is, Dee Dee doesn't. She breaks the system. Okay? That's my analogy here. So I'm trying to say, you break the system. You have a choice. When they went to fix the system, they weren't careful. Okay? They went about angry, dissatisfied. They didn't take a scalpel to the problem. You know, they took a jagged kitchen knife and they just started hacking. And then they got a bigger knife and they started hacking. And there was a lot of people just hacking, and they eventually hacked the system apart and then went in and put something else there. But the problem is, our culture also changed. And with that change, you know, you had commercialism, you had materialism, you had this furthering to buy things and to do other things that were going on at the time, and so much changed. And I look back and I start to see things like, in the ancient history of mathematics. Why is it that I can read commentaries written about ancient mathematical treatises and they make sense? Now, why is it when I read the ancient treatises, they don't make sense? Well, of course, because they're out of context. I don't have some ancient writer within sort of that social group who talks about it. Because remember, a lot of the books are written in a context. It's like, this kind of started with some of the books I found, like Data, which is written by Euclid as well as Euclid's Elements. They're very different. Very different. One is about meaning and context for mathematics, and it's looking at the first, I think it's like the first 5 books of the Elements. And it's written from a perspective of trying to understand it. And I read some of these other books, and they're kind of written by your geeky math nerd, but they're written by people who are really trying to understand the point and purpose of this book, The Element, or the purpose of, like Data or these other books. And I said to myself, there's like this biting relationship in my mind about how the world and how education has changed. And I think to myself, when I read something, when I study something, it should make sense. And if something doesn't make sense, there is an assumption inherent to me, which is that I am not that dissimilar from other people. If another human being could think of this idea, unless this human being is so different from any other human being. Does that make sense? Unless this human being is so bonkers and so crazy and so just Fruit Loopy, okay? Unless this person is absolutely nuts, I should be able, well, maybe not nuts, but they're just very different. They're a totally different type of being, and they think differently than anybody else. I should be able to understand them. And I don't think that math is written by total out-there freaks. I don't think so. I think they're human beings just like the rest of us. I think they might focus on different things, but that doesn't mean that they cannot inherently understand me, and I in turn them. It's all about context. So when I look back at, say, like Newton, I try to understand, well, where was he coming from? He had his own life and his own basis of understanding, just like I do. I'm coming from certain background information, but I think most people don't look at where is your background information coming from? Where is your position in the universe? So if everybody's spinning around the universe faster and faster and faster, and we try to take note of where anybody is, the problem is you have to look at a specific place, a location, and you have to know where everything else is in relationship to you. Okay? That's the problem. You have to take relation into account to know how things are moving. So your location is dependent upon everybody else. So if I'm here as opposed to here, I'm only able to know that by my relationship to other people, other objects, other reference points. Otherwise, space is just an empty plane that has no reference points, and it goes infinitely in every direction, and it doesn't matter which place I'm at because I'm really seeming like I'm not moving. Now, that's not meant to make you too weird, but imagine life like that. Imagine you are like this infinitely flat space, goes, or maybe three-dimensional, and it just goes forever. Forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and there's no end to it. And you exist within this, and there's no reference. Well, there's no meaning, because there's nothing there except you. Okay? Now, you wouldn't have any knowledge, you wouldn't understand anything, you couldn't exist. At the same time, what happens when you start putting things into that world? You come from a specific place in the world. You understand things because of your life and because of your experiences and because of your context. Context is like your reference in the universe, how you understand things. It's how something fits into the rest of the world. If I look, say, at the history of our world, okay? Looking at our history and understanding the relationships of things within our world is in fact context. It's teaching us about the world. If I look at, say, the history of mathematics, and I'd have to take into account where it came from. Why did math start? And you'd think as a normal student, why do I care? You care because math is close to the world that you experience. When we look at math as students in our lives, we tend to only want to look at math as a tool, because that's how it's used in our world. But that's not what math really is, nor where it came from. And if you don't understand what something really is, you're never going to fully grasp it. It's like saying, what is a bicycle? Well, you can use a bicycle, but what differentiates a bicycle from a unicycle? Why is it easier to ride a bicycle than it is a unicycle? You know? I mean, it's a much simpler thing, so what is a bike doesn't seem as pertinent of a question. What is it used for seems more practical, because a bike tends to be more of a tool. But what about if you're the person who created the bike, and you have to create bikes? See, then those sorts of questions become more important. You know, if you're just riding your bike, and you never have to fix it, and you never have to deal with it on any really fundamental level, it doesn't matter. But if you have to, you know, maybe fix the chain, maybe if you have to fix, you know, some part of it, you need to understand more about where it came from and how it works. Like, why is it, you know, if my sinking gets off a little bit of my bike, or maybe it's designed weird, so it has this interesting aspect to it. It's like, how do the gears work? Well, gears come from math. You know, you have to start to understand where it comes from. If maybe you want to design your own bike, you know, and you want to understand, why is it that I can make one bike easier than another bike to use? You know, and you can try to experiment and mess with the different gear ratios and do stuff like that. That's math. That is a part of math, part of engineering, mechanical engineering, and other things. But again, you know, you start to deal with these things, these simple constructs, like the bicycle. But what happens when you move up and you deal with something far vaster, like, you know, a social narrative, like, you know, which is basically people talking to one another? You've reached a level that I would deem pertinent to understand where something comes from, context. That's why these subjects become so esoteric, so meaningless. You know, why is it that you go into an algebra class and it makes absolutely no sense to some people and it makes sense to other people, but then those people go into geometry and they're totally lost? You know, it's like, you know, you go into school and there's this idea of, well, geometry should make sense and algebra should make sense. You know, why are they related? It wasn't until, well, there wasn't really a related, you know, they were sort of, they weren't actually part of the same subject that we call mathematics really until like Descartes. I mean, you know, algebra was not related really in any way to, at least, you know, I suppose that might have been by, trying to think of who the mathematician was, Archimedes. Archimedes, he was a strange guy. I don't think he was like a super genius, like we say, you know, some guy's a super genius. It's just that he used to try really weird shit, and he had really odd ideas because of his background in his life. He used to, you know, he used to do stuff. And there was other guys around, you know, other people around his time that they had this interesting perspective. They were interested. Maybe it was they had a dad or a mom who just influenced them in a weird way. And they had people around them that influenced them in just this peculiar way, and that influenced them to do stuff and to think differently about the world. I think I'm the same way. I've had people in my life who've given me a strange perspective. Again, this is how I look at my research. It's research into understanding how we orient ourselves in our world and how information is oriented, but how we convey it to others. Why is it that I seem to be able to learn in one classroom when I can't learn in another classroom? Is it really that, even though we talk about, testing, what makes one person a visual learner versus I don't know, what is a visual learner versus a tactile learner versus an audio visual. I mean, are we really that different? Or is it more that some people are influenced by their environment at a very young age and their body adapts to that? Is there some tendency in us that wants us to go that way? Because I feel like it's both. Some part of us wants us, we might have a tendency genetically to go one way or the other, but we still influence that by our actions. It's like diabetes. Some people are more inclined to have diabetes and others aren't. Yet if you get fat enough for a long enough period of time, even the person who doesn't have the genetic inherent tendency toward it, eventually at some point will likely get it, or could get it at least. I mean, you'd have to have really damn good genes not to. But the point is, you're still putting stress on your body, and eventually your body will go pop. You'll end up with it. You'll fuck yourself up. You can't, even if you build something to be the strongest and the best, eventually you'll burn it out. So, if you're a visual learner who is always exposed to things auditorially, eventually you're going to become kind of an auditorial learner, just because that's what, your brain begins to wire itself for. Even if maybe you'd learn better as a visual learner to start with. So then what do? You're like an audio-visual learner. Maybe there is such a thing as an audio-visual learner. I don't know. I'm kind of all three. And this is kind of getting off topic a little, but I guess when I look at the history of learning, it's so difficult for me to try to explain this to anybody because there's so much going on. I mean, I guess I'm trying to look at the history of our world and understand knowledge and understand how knowledge is conveyed historically and how to best convey it. I mean, I have to do some research, but I'd like to know, is there really a textbook out there or a book or any subject matter out there that really talks about how do you teach? How do you convey information to people? Do we have really a subject like that? I mean, I look at the subject called education. They don't even talk about pedagogy anymore. You look at all the major universities out there. No university I have seen talks about how do you teach. I mean, the subject matter from, all the stuff I viewed and read about, it's all scientific studies on, like, the human mind and the problems in school and all these things. But where is the class titled How to Teach? Oh, I see some of those courses in, like, math classes, like, elementary school geometry. How do you, teach geometry, how to teach math, or how to teach geometry, or how to teach, high school math. But that's in math. That's not in, like, education. There's not a course on how to teach a class. How to teach, how to do something. Like how to draw, how to clean that bad smell out of your back bathroom. Where is the course that's telling you how to do these things? Because without understanding how to do stuff, you're never going to be able to go out in the world and do it. You're going to have to learn on the job. And that's the point of school. If you're going to school for education, is not to learn about a whole bunch of scientific studies so you can become an academic researcher looking at the peculiarities of certain, anomalies in the education system and sort of become more pedantic and useless. It's to teach people how to go out into the world and become teachers. and take a bunch of information that they've learned and convey that information to students in their respective fields so they can actually teach students. So those students can learn and they can go out and become, well-rounded citizens. It's not so that some pedantic dickhead can run around with his flaming ego and say, I've written some, summary thesis on the importance of round pencils as opposed to octagonal pencils in 3rd grade elementary. It's not what it's about. It's about teaching people how to go out into a classroom and take a textbook and understand how to use a textbook and understand what makes a good textbook, what makes a good program, how to convey information, how to teach students, how to do these sorts of things. And if you don't have that, you're never going to be able to teach anybody. And I guess that's what I'm looking at in my own life. And it's an obsession I have because I've had such poor teachers over the course of my life. And I think a lot of them, it's not really their fault. They just don't know, and they're totally oblivious to it. I used to be angry and frustrated and hate people and just, and be this enveloped bitter student because of what I didn't get. And I realize now it's not their fault, really, because no one ever taught them. There's no discipline. There's no social narrative about actually how to teach. There isn't. And even the books that are on sort of education, on pedagogy, there's no real subjects on pedagogy. I mean, I looked online, you'll look up books, research on pedagogy, and I've had troubles finding stuff. Now, maybe I've been really focused and I'm a bad library student and I'm bad at doing this, and maybe I haven't found the right book, and there probably is stuff out there. And maybe it's, 100 years old, maybe it's new and there's stuff out there. It's just, shouldn't it be, for all the crap I've found, all the research that I've done into all of these subjects and all of these disciplines. I mean, I found some interesting studies that I can't afford to buy right now on math and how it's taught in other parts of the world. It's a really interesting math series, and I want to get into that. But again, that I found through years and years of research, learning, growing my perspective, and continuing. And I guess now it's, from my perspective, how do I go out and take this information that I've learned and convey it? And it's frustrating, really frustrating. Anyhow, I hope this video has at least been somewhat helpful to people. I realize that I don't tend to post anything really personal to me and talking about myself, and I'm sorry if the syncing on this video got screwed up. It's just, my webcam recorder's fucked. So anyhow, I hope everybody enjoys themselves, and I hope this video has been somewhat helpful to you. Thanks.